Hi, Kristen.
Hey Jennine, how you doing?
Doing all right. I'm doing all right. I just had this memory of one time when I was like in my 30s and I like tried to lose weight. And I was like really punishing myself going to the gym like every single day at like 5:30 in the morning, like at the gym
Whoa.
and like eating like these like tiny salads and like doing like all the things. And then when I finally like reached my goal weight, like I just remember thinking like, and I literally like this thought, that's it. Like that's it. And then this other thought was like, I am not any happier. My life is not different. Like nothing is different except I'm slightly more miserable.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's so interesting because with the rise of like skinny talk and everybody, not everybody, but many people using GLP-1s and a lot
Which is a
of
weight loss drug.
yeah, like the Ozempic style weight loss drug, and so it's become easier to get thinner very recently. It's kind of crazy how quickly everything seems to have changed.
Hmm.
And a lot of times, you think that, okay, if I just get it, this is what everyone wants to be right now. Skinny is the outfit. Like, I'm going to be awesome. Then you get there and you're like, oh, everything else is still the same. Like,
Yeah.
it
So
didn't, it didn't like advance my career. It didn't like make me smarter. It didn't make me like a kinder person. It didn't make my relationships better. It just
mhm.
made me skinnier. It just made me live in a different body.
Yeah. So that's why I'm so excited to talk to Chrissy King. She's the author of the Body Liberation Project, and she really has a really great point of view on the intersection between social justice, race, class, and body shape. And I think it's a really interesting to think about like when you have these thoughts like, oh, I need to be thin, what is like the cultural things that are happening on the outside? And once you start to recognize that, it becomes easier to identify like what those thoughts are on the inside. So
Right. And you realize it's not just a trend, like a superficial trend. There's so much more behind it. There's like like in particular what's going on in the political landscape,
exactly,
and
exactly.
she has such a unique point of view because she was in the fitness industry and now she's become like a writer on body inclusivity, etc. So I'm super excited for
Yeah,
our
let's go talk
conversation
to
with her.
her. Yeah, let's go talk to
Yay.
her. Okay. Hi, welcome to the Closet Philosophy Podcast. This is Jennine. I'm a personal stylist.
And this is Kristen. I'm a fashion writer, and we're here to uncover the ways that your personal style is so much more than just clothes.
Whether you realize it or not, what you wear touches on science, psychology, culture, politics, and so much more. So today we're joined by Chrissy King, writer, speaker, educator, and former strength coach, who is reshaping the conversation around wellness, identity, and liberation. Chrissy is the author of The Body Liberation Project, a groundbreaking book that empowers us to stop shrinking, take up space, and embrace the fullness of who we are. With degrees in social justice and sociology from the Marquette University, she merges her deep knowledge of systemic issues with her passion for wellness, writing for platforms like Shape, Health, Self, and POPSUGAR. Throughout her work, Chrissy helps us imagine and create spaces where every body across size, race, gender, and identity feels seen, welcomed, and celebrated. Welcome to the show. So glad you're
Oh
here.
my God. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yay. We're so thrilled to talk with you. So your book, The Body Liberation Project, that's such a powerful title. And I'm wondering, can you share what body liberation means to you and how does that go beyond what we hear a lot called body positivity?
Yeah, absolutely. I love this question. So I think body positivity is like the term that I think most people are familiar with. And I think when I started working on healing my relationship with my body, that was the term that I most knew as well. And I think it is a really good introduction to thinking about your body differently. But oftentimes body positivity is this heavy emphasis on like loving your body and loving the skin you're in. And I think those things are really important. And I think they're really meaningful. But I also feel like within body positivity, there's a heavy emphasis on like you as the individual needing to heal your relationship with bodies without looking at the systemic issues that are really causing all of us to feel the way that we feel within our bodies. And so body liberation is a step beyond that. It's not just about like loving your body and looking in the mirror and say you love everything that you see, because also spoiler alert, that probably will never happen. There will always be times where there's something you might not like about the way you look, right? Or that you will have insecurities. And I think this idea that one day you will finally get to this place and you'll never have negative thoughts about your body literally just sets us all up for failure. That's just not realistic. And so body liberation is less about looking in the mirror and saying, I just love every single thing I see about myself, and more about saying, like, I'm respecting that this vessel I live in and all the different iterations that it will inhibit throughout the course of my life is worthy and deserving of respect. And also that I understand that it is just a vessel, right? It's a thing that's allowing me to have this human experience. It's not what I am or who I am. And yes, there are repercussions for the body we live in, and we can talk about that. But also, even going beyond that, it's really about understanding the systems that would make it difficult for all of us to feel good in our bodies. And how can we work towards collectively dismantling the systems that are making it hard for us, right? So
Mhm.
that regardless of gender, age, sexuality, race, you get to exist in your body free of harm and free to take up space in the world without repercussions for that vessel that we're living in.
Yeah, that is so interesting. And something that a lot of people don't really think about. They think it's such like an internal thing. Like I have body issues. And like we all have body issues, but it's like it's they feel like it's a personal failure if they're not
Mhm.
able to challenge those body issues or to see that they're thinking that as a result of a greater whole, which is more systemic issues. And I love it if you talk a little bit to like what some of those systemic things are that are affecting the way that we think about ourselves.
Yeah, so I think one thing I always like to talk about is I think bigger part of this conversation is that there's like a real difference between I have a personal body image issue, like maybe I don't like the cellulite on my thighs, or I don't like my belly fat or my arms, right? Like those are personal body image issues that all of us most likely have. And then there's a difference between that and living in a body that's systemically oppressed, right? So
Mhm.
within a society that's like homophobic and racist and all these things, there are repercussions for living in certain types of bodies that go beyond just like I don't like the way that I look, right? And so even when we think about society, it's like the whole world is like centered around for thinness, right? And we thinking about the sizing of things, airplanes, seats on airplanes, or like the availability of size inclusive stores or size inclusive clothing when you go into stores, or even just the fact that like folks in larger bodies are less likely to be promoted or get raises and all these things. Like those are things in the world that exist because of fat phobia and anti-fat bias that exists in the world, or weight stigma even in the medical industry, how you get treated when you go to the doctor. Do doctors take your health issues seriously or just say, oh, you just need to lose weight? That's the problem. That's the reason you're having the health issues.
Mhm.
And so when we think about there's like a difference between those things and being treated differently in the world because of the way that you exist, I think that's a really important part of the conversation. And unfortunately, when we think about society in general, like all of us have been very much conditioned to believe that health equals, or that thinness equals health, right? And that we can look at someone and determine by the size of their bodies if they're quote unquote healthy or not. And that's simply just not true.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I was like actually just thinking about this the other day. So, my uncle was like really athletic and really like physically fit like his whole life. And my mother is not. She is more like lives in a larger body and stuff. And he would always be like concerned about her health. And so it would be like, oh, like your mom might be diabetic. We should really like talk to her about her weight. Da 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 da. Well, guess what? He had a heart attack and died, and my mom is still like healthy and she's living her best life. You know what I mean? And so it's like
Yeah.
it doesn't necessarily mean that doesn't equate. And this is totally anecdotal, but it doesn't necessarily mean that just because on the outside you have like less fat on your body or you're quote unquote like physically fit, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are more healthy. And I know Kristen really wants to talk to you about the Serena Williams.
Yeah.
Yeah, I your post about Serena Williams being was it like People or Us magazine she was on interviewed
Yeah.
when
I think it
and
was people. I can't
One
remember,
of
but I think it
those.
was people. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny because it was fed to me and I was like, "Oh my God, we're interviewing her this week. That's so cool." Like I was like riveted because I loved your take on that because and her quote was that she's a perfect example of someone who can be at the top of her game, winning every championship, like could not be doing better in any way really, but her coach is still saying to her, you probably should think about losing weight. Like you need to lose
Yeah.
weight. Like how can I get like I'm not clearly not hindering my performance, like the size of my body. And I think that's such a good message. And maybe just for people who maybe haven't seen that post, could you kind of like just unpack that, like how you talked about it?
Yeah, I talked about this a lot over the last week or two because it is a very nuanced conversation. So, for anyone who's not familiar, Serena Williams recently came out that she was taking GLP-1s. She's also the spokesperson for a company called Row. And she went on the Today Show, I believe it was. And I know she was in, like, I think it was either People or US Weekly, one of those, talking about it as well. One of the things that she says on the interview in particular on the Today Show is that when she was, training 5 days a week, she's winning tournaments. She's like, a really doing very well athletically and at the top of her career. And her coach was always telling her that she needed to lose weight. And she said, I would get to this number on the scale and I couldn't get beneath it. And so that was always really frustrating for her. And I think that it's just such a nuanced conversation because on one hand, we have from our perspective, at least my perspective, is someone who is one of the greatest athletes of all time. I won't even say the greatest tennis player, right? One of the greatest
Mhm.
athletes of all
Absolutely.
time.
Yeah.
And even the greatest athlete of time is like still being told they need to lose weight. And that's like kind of jarring to for me when I heard that because I'm like, well, if you're winning and you're doing this great, what's the reason that what are you gonna be better? I don't know. And so it's like it's really interesting from that perspective. I also think, one of the things I really talked about is when I saw this come out in the news, I'm like, oh, this is going to take like the internet by storm for a lot of reasons. But one of the first things I thought about in terms of Serena Williams is like, and I talk about this in my book actually, specifically, is that Serena Williams has always been at the intersection of racism and sexism.
Hmm.
And so throughout her entire career, just people on the internet, but even like actual news reporters were referring to her body and likening it to a gorilla, right? And so that is not like a incidental or coincidental thing. That is like, oh, you're in a larger muscular body and the color of your skin. And that's why her body is being talked about in that way. And so I think that from my perspective, I'm like, for a person who is the greatest athlete of all time, and their body has still always been at the center of the conversation around their talent, and also been told that it's not thin enough and that she looks like a gorilla and like all these things, like, is it really surprising that a person would be like, I just want to be thinner? Because maybe that's my way to stop some of this criticism about my looks, right? And so I think it's really nuanced. And then on the other hand, I see people who say that they feel frustrated, they feel disappointed because if the greatest athlete of all time still thinks she needs to be skinnier, what does that mean for the rest of us? And I can also understand that perspective, and I understand that, but I think that we can't look at a person like Serena Williams and make her the antagonist for why we all don't feel good in our bodies when she has been at the intersection of all the things around fat phobia, anti-fat bias. I also talk about in my book about the fact that like diet culture and this idea that being a thin body goes back to the inception of slavery. And
Hmm.
Dr. Sabrina Strings wrote an incredible book called Fearing the Black Body that discusses this in detail. And
Hmm.
so I'm like, yes, we can say, wow, I'm really sad that the greatest tennis player of all time feels like she needs to be thinner. And also, there's all these other implications that are happening as well. And perhaps Serena is just another victim of the system that we're all living under.
Hmm.
And one of the things I didn't even touch in on the article, because again, I could write a dissertation on this probably, was that the company Row, a lot of the criticism was also that her husband is an investor in the company, right? Now she's the spokesperson for this company. So again, I can understand people's feelings about that. But Charles Barkley, who is like an incredible basketball player, retired basketball player, has been the spokesperson for Roe for over a year. And I've actually never heard anybody talking critically about that at all. And so I think, again, it comes back to this impact of like race and sexism and how she really lives at the intersection of that. And I just feel like a lot of compassion versus disappointment when I think of that situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
And I also think it's really interesting too, like this whole idea that you brought up the book Fearing the Black Body by Dr. Sabrina Strings. And like she had a really interesting section on there about like how like thinness was equated to whiteness
Hmm.
because of the mixing of slave owners,
Yes.
raping for
Hmm.
yeah, raping slaves and having these mixed children. And so
Yeah.
what did it mean to be white, right? And so like
Yes.
so then it's like, okay, thinness is white. And then on top of it, there was this added layer of thinness and whiteness and morality
Immorality,
was
exactly.
put into
Yes.
place. And so I think this is really interesting that you bring up that book in this context because of, well, for the record, I never thought that Serena Williams, like I always thought she just had an athletic, like when people
I think
said,
he
"Oh,
looks
she's not,"
great.
I was like,
Yeah.
Amazing.
yeah,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
what? I didn't understand like how that what she had to go through. But at the same time, it's like this whole notion of like what it means to be living in that intersection of like trying to be more thin because it gives you more social currency or something
Yeah,
along those lines.
absolutely.
And then it's
Absolutely.
also like a part of a moral like
Like
it's
a
like
moral failing that she can't get to the particular weight that people think she should be at.
yeah.
Absolutely.
And you know what? On the flip side, also, I feel like all this pressure for her to be in this body that is being projected on her. What if she could have even been a better athlete? I mean, that you can't really imagine her being a better athlete, but what
Yeah.
if that
Yeah.
the dieting or whatever she was doing to try to get to that better body, what if that was hindering her performance? Because,
Right.
what if she wasn't giving herself the appropriate fuel that she needed to perform maybe even better,
Mhm.
That's a possibility as well.
Yeah, and I think all of the things that you all are saying, I totally agree with. And I think the thing that makes it really difficult for anybody who lives in the public eye, and like I know people will say, well, they chose this, but I would still argue that it makes it difficult, especially for someone like an athlete that lives in the public eye, to also have all of us, myself included, right? Speculating about what's the reason and what's the real reason and was she a better athlete before? Is she a better athlete now? Does she look better in this body? Does she look better in that body? And I think the irony of the whole situation is that in some ways this has still continued to make her body the subject of the conversation, right? So it's also this idea that like no matter what a person does with their body, they can't win, particularly no matter what a Black woman does with their body, they can't win. I think about Lizzo, right? Like when she was in a larger body, it was all the conversations and the trolls talking about how she looked and then she lost weight. And then you have all these people being like, oh, we're so disappointed in Lizzo. She was like our body positivity queen. And I think oftentimes we're also projecting what we want people to be for us, even if they haven't said those things. Um, and so I think all of this for myself is a reminder that like divesting from celebrity culture in the sense that like we're looking to these people as like role models, we will always be disappointed because they're just people just like us who are living under the same pressures that we are, and sometimes even in a heightened sense of that pressure. And yeah, like it can be really difficult if we're putting how we feel about ourselves heavily invested in like this person that we don't actually have a personal relationship with. I think we'll always find ourselves feeling disappointed because bodies are allowed to change. That's the other part of the
Yeah.
conversation. Like people are allowed to make what decisions they want to make about their bodies, even if we don't agree with them. Like we don't actually have to agree with them. And so I think it's always important to keep that in mind as well.
When you think about getting older, bodies not only are allowed to change, but they will inevitably change.
Yeah,
They're
yes.
going to change.
Mhm.
And, that's something else we wanted to talk to you about is like as women get older, often we feel disconnected from our bodies. And, when big transitions like motherhood, menopause, career changes, all of those
Mhm.
things, do you have any advice for women to rebuild that connection?
I mean, one thing I'm almost going to be 40, so I'm thinking about perimenopause. I'm thinking about like all the things that inevitably will happen as you speak to, because bodies, one thing we can be sure of as long as we're alive, our bodies are going to be changing
Mhm.
and our abilities are going to be changing, all the things. And so I think one thing that has been really important for me is like I think just like acknowledging that like the bodies that we exist in are made to deteriorate. That's just like the reality of it,
That's so
right?
true. Yeah.
It is like these bodies, these vessels are going to deteriorate, they're going to change. And one thing I talk about a lot in the book is like how can we learn to like accept our bodies in all of the different iterations because there will be so many different ones. And I was talking about this recently with a friend is that like we think about disability and like how we treat disabled folks within society. And the reality is that most of us will be disabled at some point, maybe not in the same capacity, but we will experience that as our bodies age and deteriorate or just like life happens. And so I think it's really important to recognize that like the one thing that will always be constant is our body is going to be changing. And I think that the less we become to this attached to this particular version, like it has to look like this, it has to be this size, it has to be able to move like this, it has to be able to function like this. Like that is not going to be, that's just not reality. And I do think it's really difficult because again, like the site is very ageist, right? Like it gives us these messages every time that like we're not supposed to have wrinkles. We're supposed to look, I think about Kardashian, right? Like she has a completely new face. And I'm like, well, she's 70. I hope to God I'm not worried about looking like I'm 40 when I'm 70. Like that is not aging. If we're not aging, we are dead. And that's just it. And I just think learning to like really have a lot of compassion with yourself every single day is like the most important thing we can do because our bodies are doing what they're supposed to do. And I know that can be really hard to accept or acknowledge sometimes. And sometimes, I don't know, I got into this place like recently, I'm like, wow, I don't look the same anymore. And I'm like, well, you're not 20 anymore. Like things change. And it's like, how can I learn to appreciate this version of myself and honestly just have so much compassion because it can be really hard to live in a body. And I think that's something we don't talk about enough.
Mm. Yeah, and I would love to hear your thoughts about like where you find that line as to like where you accept and where you want to change because like I personally like I have been like in a range of weight like fluctuating back and
Yeah.
forth most of my life, and then the pandemic and perimenopause hit at the same time, and I gained like 30 pounds in the space of a year, and or maybe it was 40. It was like I gained like the most weight I ever gained aside from being pregnant, and I just didn't feel like myself, and I didn't feel like me. And so I did go on a weight loss journey, but I have to say that there are some things about me that will just never change. Like have always had a belly ever since I was 5. Like my mom had me
Yeah.
doing sit-ups when I was 5 years old because I had this like bee belly. And I never will have a flat stomach. Never, ever, ever will. Like even now, like at the thinnest I've ever been in my life, I still have like a bee belly. And it's like, okay, like I could like for me, like the difference between acceptance and like what I can change and what I can't is like, okay, like I could go down this road of like exercising and dieting and exercising and dieting, but would I be happy?
Yeah.
And so I don't know, like, can you talk a little bit more to that as to like where do you recommend people like kind of find that space to them of like when are they happy, or like when they can be okay with like with like Lizzo, she wanted to change her body,
Mhm.
so like she went through this change, and when to be like, okay, this is where I am now and this is how I am, and I'm going to accept that and be happy with myself.
Yeah, I don't think there's like a one size fits all answer for that. I think I'll just speak to my own personal experience. For me, is like when I was in my absolute thinnest body, the things I had to do to keep that body were really, really difficult.
Hmm.
I had to work out every day, multiple hours. I had to be really strict with what I was eating. I had to count every single, thing that I was intaking. And even though I was like the thinnest version I'd ever been as an adult, I also was like the most miserable I'd ever been because I was doing so
Hmm.
much to keep my body in to keep my body that small. And so I always think that's one thing for people to think about. Like, when it comes to like body size in particular, like we have this like disconnect, right? Because like we can look around the world and be like, oh, some of us have blonde hair, some of us have brown hair, we have blue eyes, brown eyes. Like some of I'm almost 6 feet tall. Some people are really tall, some people are shorter. And we're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Genetics, everybody's different. But then when it comes to body size, we like forget that like all bodies aren't created to be small. And that's just the reality of it, right? Like genetic variations. I'm never going to be a super tiny person. And even when I was my thinnest, I had to do so much just to try to stay that size. And so
Hmm.
I think that's an also important part to like think about. It's like, I think that when it comes to like exercise and fitness and like eating well, the thing that and I used to be a coach and a trainer, right? And so I used to help people with like all of these things. And I think that the thing that as I work through my own healing, my own relationship with body image, one of the things I really start to think about is like instead of saying like, oh, I want to look this certain way or I want to be a number on the scale, it's like, do I feel nourished? Do I feel energized? Do I feel like I can move well? Do I feel comfortable in my body? Like those are the things to me that are far more important than like, do I fit in this particular size? Because again, like I will never be a size 2 for probably never even a size, even when I was a size 6 is the smallest I remember being. Like I said, it was incredibly difficult for me to stay in that body size. And so I think just thinking about instead of comparing it to like, what do I think I'm supposed to look like in the world? And again, very difficult when we live under like Eurocentric standards of beauty, but less about like, what is that and how do I want to feel in my body? And like, what daily things can I do to achieve the way that I want to feel in my body?
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, like, I think about when I was the smallest I ever was. And for me, it was more like I was kind of naturally that size at that time. But as I've gotten older and gone through menopause, that has changed a
Yeah.
lot. The other, like, sort of thought pattern that happens is that I think of myself back then when I was like, whatever, size 6 or 4, 6 or whatever, I thought I was fat. And now I look at those pictures and I was like, and I think, oh my God, I was so tiny. I was very tiny. And I think about myself now and I'm like it's a like a psychological game that I have to play with myself to look at that and be like, okay, you thought you were fat then, you weren't. It's not productive to think
Yeah.
along those lines. So let's just accept that bodies change and, easier said than done, but I loved what you said about, accept that your body is just not going to stay the same.
It's not. Yeah.
No, it's not. And one of the things I talked about too is I used to have when I was like 21 or in my early 20s, I used to have this pair of jeans that I was like, this is my jeans. Like when I'm in these can fit in these pair of jeans, this is the right size body. But I had those jeans since I was 16. It's like, well, what
Oh my
maybe I'm
God.
not so you don't have like a
Yeah.
maybe I'm not supposed to look the same as I want to say. And so the same thing is like now that I'm nearing 40, like maybe the jeans from when I was 21 aren't gonna fit now. Like, right? Like that's just a part of life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think also too, I think people, one of the things I don't think that most people don't realize is that, particularly when it comes to like personal style, style is not attached to size.
Mm,
Like there are
yeah.
people with great style in larger bodies at every range. There are people with great
Hmm.
style. It has nothing to do with your creativity. It has nothing to do with your ability to put together like a great, the availability of sizes, that's another story.
Right.
But like if you can find the clothes or if you have access to those clothes, like personally, like I don't see like size and beauty as being equated to each other. And I mean, I'm not gonna say like a lot of times I have to check my own biases, but at the same time, it's like just getting to that point where you realize that when you see other people, like,
I think that's important though, because I think that one thing, especially when it comes to like body size and styling, like I always find it helpful to look at people who have like a similar body size to me or body type as I'm looking for like style inspiration, perhaps, right? Like I'm probably
mhm,
not going to look at someone who's a size 0 and be like, let me try to dress like them. Like I try to find someone that I think is like, oh, I love their style and also has a similar body type to me. Because you're correct, like there are people in every body size that are incredibly stylish.
Yeah,
yeah.
and I think that's so important and representation is so important. I find it so helpful when I look at even like social media, it can be used for good or bad. And I find it I find it's like, I don't know, like comforting, or I just love seeing older women on social media because I'm sort of seeing myself and it gives me permission to be seen as an older woman, and I think what you talk about on your channel is similar. It's like talking about people living in different size bodies and all the thought process that goes into just being accepting of yourself in whatever size body you're at. It's just so important to see what you either are or what you want to be,
Mm,
you know, online and social media. So thank you for doing that. It's
yeah.
Yeah.
it's appreciated.
Well, that was one of the, I don't think people really actually realize this, but like the whole advent of like fashion blogs and like that whole thing, social media really opened the door for inclusivity in fashion. Because I
Mm,
don't think that a lot of people realize the kind of work that bloggers did, like Gabby Fresh and like Nicolette Mason, but Gabby Fresh with the fat bikini in like
mhm.
2010, where she wore like a bikini and she was in a larger body, and like she looked great, and people were like, "Oh my God!" Like that's is there's a lot of criticism, but there was a lot of like opening the door, like, "Oh," and then she came up with her own swimwear line, I believe, and so
Yeah.
these are like the types of things that started to happen because we were seeing these like images and this content, really great content across the board with people in different size bodies. And all of a sudden it was like, okay, things like I talk to people in larger bodies, for a living. And like one of the things is like 10, 15 years ago, the accessibility to cute clothes was not anywhere near what it is today. And it's still not where it needs to be, but it's a lot better than it used to be. I also want like you had mentioned, like you studied like social justice, and I
Yeah.
don't think that people think about like body size as a social justice issue. But, like, especially like, I think like over the summer, we had this whole conversation about like skinny shaming. And some people thought that skinny shaming was the same as fat shaming. And I kept on saying that it's not for
So,
multiple reasons. It's not.
I would
So
love to hear more about
I
that.
would love to
Yeah.
hear your thoughts on the intersection of like body size, body shape, and social justice.
yeah, I mean, again, I think that regardless of what size your body in, someone can have something negative to say about that. But when we live in a society where thinness is seen as the ideal and seen as the beauty standard, being skinny shamed is just not the same as being fat shamed. And again, that doesn't mean that people who lived in skinny bodies haven't felt bad about their bodies. They absolutely
Mm,
can and probably have. And also, the difference though is, like I said a little bit earlier, you are not systemically oppressed because you live in a thinner body.
mhm.
And when we think about the intersection of body size and social justice, is such a huge issue. I was recently, I didn't even finish it, but there was a new documentary on Netflix about The Biggest Loser.
Oh yeah,
Mm.
to
I got
watch.
through one episode and 10 minutes of the second one, and I said, I don't need to watch any more of this. And it's actually so interesting watching it back because it came out in 2000, I want to say 2004. I was 18 then. I remember watching that show. And also, this was like back when, TV services weren't streaming. So it's like the show came on at this day at this time, and you went and like watched the show. So I very much remember watching that show. And watching it back now, it is so incredibly difficult to watch. And in that show, I think what is really eye-opening to me, which I already knew it, but just like seeing it, is that it is so publicly acceptable to dehumanize people in larger bodies.
Mhm.
The entire show is people in larger bodies being yelled at, being screamed at, being mistreated. In order to stay on the show, they had to or they had to like burn 6,000 calories a day,
Which is like,
which
is
is
that possible?
I don't even know. I mean, I guess it
Yeah.
is. I don't know how, but it's just like completely inhumanely treated. And all because it's like it was deemed okay because at the end they were going to be skinny and now you are a worthwhile and valuable person within society. And I just think that, although that show doesn't exist anymore, I think it is very much mirrors the way that people treat larger bodies in society, right? As you already spoke to a little bit, Jean, earlier, it's like it's a moral failing if you're in a larger body, right? Like it's like a lack of morality, lack of discipline. There's something wrong with you if your body exists in that way. And that also not only something wrong with you, it's almost socially acceptable for people to say that. There aren't the repercussions that they are for saying that. And I think even for myself in my own work, like
Mhm.
so many times online when I've said something, like people's first response is to call me fat. I'm like, okay, well that like the response to like I don't like the thing you said, so I'm gonna just denigrate you by calling you fat.
Mhm.
Like
Oh
that's an
my God.
insult, right? And so it's the way that and you see that all the time. Like that's like a very common thing. And so it's like the way that we have made it socially, we meaning society, have made it socially acceptable to make fat an insult, to make fat a bad thing. When again, fat is just a way to exist in a body, same as being skinny is a way to exist in a body. And when we think about like fat politics and body politics, I mean, I think that in itself is an issue that touches all areas of society. And when I think about social justice work, like you can't do social justice work doesn't exist within a vacuum, right? And so when you think about like fat phobia or sexism or homophobia or transphobia or anti-Blackness, like all of these things exist, and there are people that live at the intersections of all of those things. And so also when I think about body positivity, and one of the beef that I have with body positivity is that it is not just enough to be like, oh, I want to love myself. It's that I want to create a society in which everybody, regardless of size and shape, gets to exist and love themselves.
Mm.
Yeah. So, so you used to be a fitness trainer, so you were in that world. What are there any changes like that you would like to see in the industry, like anything specific that to make it actually truly inclusive?
Yeah, a lot of changes actually. And so it's really interesting because during 2020, right after George Floyd, when as a country we had this moment in time when we were focusing on anti-racism and inclusivity. A lot of my work really exploded during that time because prior to George Floyd, I had been talking about like the need for inclusivity and and fitness spaces and wellness spaces, the need for anti-racism. And it wasn't like a really popular topic before George Floyd.
Mm,
And so then we had this moment, I say like 2020 to like 20 mid 2022, when I think that in a global and in a bigger way than I'd ever seen before, especially in the wellness industry, we were having conversations around like all of inclusivity as it pertains, not just bodies, but that was a big part of it, but just like in general, like why we need to make fitness and wellness spaces really inclusive. And I felt like I felt like people were listening, like we were having good conversations, and I kind of felt like I think a lot of things are happening at one time in like end of 2024 into 2025. The New York Post made an article that said heroin chic is back. And we started talking about then being in again in terms of bodies. And then we had the introduction of GLP-1s for intentional weight loss in a massive way. And so I think a lot of the work that we had been talking about in the fitness and wellness space around like all bodies can move and all bodies deserve to be in fitness spaces, and they don't have to be for the intention of losing weight, and even having conversations about how can we make gym spaces more inclusive? Like, are we having gender neutral changing facilities? Like, are we using gender neutral language? Are we having fitness and coaches trainers who know how to work with trans bodies, disabled bodies, larger bodies, like all of these things? And I think that as we have just had this like really harsh backlash in terms of like some of the progress we were making, I feel like a lot of those conversations have reverted. And I really see like diet culture in fitness and movement spaces like really back in a big way, which is kind of disheartening. And I think it's really interesting because I remember when my book came out in 2023, and I remember like in 2022, I was like, wow, this is so wild. I don't even think anybody's going to really need to read this book because like we are moving in the right direction. Like people are getting
mm.
it. And it's so wild because now, just a couple of short years later, I'm like, oh, I feel like no one has read anything in the book. Like we've gone back in the opposite direction so quickly. And so it's a little wild. I feel like a whiplash still with like all the changes that we've seen over the past few years.
Yeah, I thought there, I don't know if you're on TikTok, but there was like this
Hmm.
whole conversation with like Slim Kim.
Yeah,
He
yes.
said, my
I
favorite,
did a video about that.
yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
my favorite thing about me is being skinny
Yeah.
or being thin. I don't know which word she
No,
used.
she said being skinny. Yeah,
Being
she said being
skinny.
skinny. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'd love to hear like your thoughts on that because I thought that that was really like interesting on a lot of levels.
It was. And I think what was interesting about that moment in time in particular was that I feel like Slim Kim said the quiet thing out loud. Like I thought of think, I thought it was terrible, by the way. But
Yeah.
what was interesting is like the reactions to it. There were definitely a lot of I talked about like why that was incredibly harmful, but then there was a lot of people who were doubling down, like, yeah, exactly. Like finally we can say it. And so I think with that video, with Slim Kim saying that, and then like you really saw an uptick in skinny talk content
Mhm.
all happening like simultaneously.
Yeah, because there was that also that trend going on, like skinny is the outfit.
Yes,
People did that. It
yes.
was like both at the same time. And it's like all of a sudden it became very clear that we're in a new era right
It's
now.
a new
Hmm.
era. I almost feel like it's like 2000s age, like diet culture fat phobia back in a big way. And I think, but I do think it's even more harmful now because again, with TikTok, right, we have like massive amounts of people watching these type of videos and like really doubling down on it around that same time. There was like all these videos about walking 20 and 30,000 steps a day. And like all of this happening at one time. And again, I really feel like in a lot of ways, it gave permission for people to feel okay, not only being fat phobic, but also being loud and proud about like, again, like Slim Kim says, skinny is my favorite thing to be. Like that's how I like to exist in the world.
Well, no, it was even more, it's like her favorite thing about
Oh,
herself.
about herself. Yes,
Yeah,
yes. Her
which
thing
is
about
even
herself.
like not your personality, like not your
No.
Yeah.
not your
Yeah.
intelligence, like not
No, it was
your charisma,
that.
like your thinness, and like that was a really interesting thing to. I don't want to. I don't know what to say. Like I was really a little bit disturbed by it, but
Oh
I didn't
yeah,
know
I found it
really.
very disturbing.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
didn't
and
know
it
what to say.
like you said, it's even more it potentially more disturbing because so many people can access this content. But
Yeah.
then also on the other hand, it's great that there are influencers like you and other accounts that are body inclusive to counter it. So at least if you're a person living in a bigger body and you're looking for content out there that reflects who you feel that you are, you can find that as well, which is kind of like, but then the scary thing is we're all just living in these
I know.
tunnels. Like we're all
Yeah.
consuming content in a tunnel, and if
Yeah.
you're like a skinny talker, like you're not looking at a body inclusive influencer. So yeah, we're all kind of on a different rail.
I kind of feel like you can't ever really slide back though. Once the genie is out of the bottle, they can have all of this like thin is in and heroin chic is in and all of this kind of stuff, but it's already people already like once you've been like liberated, you can't go back. Once you have find that, like you still have to fight it. Yes, that never
Yeah.
goes away, but like all it's like being aware that you're a fish in water, like being aware of the water. Like you can see that this is actually not reality. This is like a cultural preference or this is a construct. It's not real. And like I don't know. I feel like
Yeah.
that makes a
I
difference.
I do, and I think that to a certain degree I agree with that. And the only caveat I would say to that is I've seen, and again, this is no judgment because I will never make judgment about what people decide to with their own bodies,
Mhm.
but there have been a lot of positive previously like body positive influencers who are all getting thin again now. And a lot of them
Oh,
have been really open about their use of GLP-1s. And again, it's not for me to judge why they've decided to do what they've decided to do, but I have seen that, and I feel like that's also an interesting conversation, but I'm not equipped to have because, again, I don't live in those people's bodies. But I think that one thing that I have been thinking about is that for some folks, perhaps when you felt like you had no choice but to live in a larger body, like you felt like that was like what your body was just how it was going to be, it was important to learn to like love it in that version. And then I think for a lot, not for a lot of folks, for some folks, when GLP-1s became an option to like, oh, I actually don't have to live in this larger body anymore. I think some people decided to do that. Again, that's not for me to make judgments about it, but I think it has been interesting to see, and that has been a big conversation within the body positivity, body liberation space, is because a lot of people that folks were following, because like you said, like I see these people who are embracing their curves and their bodies and they're like, talking about things that really resonate, have like shifted into something different. And, again, that's their prerogative. But I do think that part of it makes it also difficult for people who are just trying to like find this place of peace and acceptance in their bodies when you see people that you previously were like looking up to. And it sometimes feels like you turn around like everybody's getting skinny again, right?
yeah.
And I think a deeper conversation here that I really haven't had in a huge capacity, I've touched on it here and there. I do want to write about it at some point, but I feel like it's a broader piece that I will work on over time is that I personally believe there's like a real connection to the rise in thinness and skinny talk and the rise in conservatism. Like I
Mhm.
think
Oh
there's a
yeah.
really big connection there that I think people aren't even maybe noticing, right? Because like when we talk about like the pipeline to MAGA or whatever, like we sometimes look at these bigger things and it's like these are also these little subtle things, even like the messaging in reality TV, the things that we're seeing. I talked about this the last season of Love and Blind in Minneapolis and like how much conservative talk was on that show. And I'm like, these are like these little subtle things that are
Mhm.
being pieced out to us. And I don't think that as a society we can always see what's happening in front of our eyes, but I definitely think there's a link to that.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about that? I know we're like short on time, but I'd really like to
Yeah.
hear like what you think that connection is because I like I hear people talk about it a lot, but I don't really hear people like really articulating what exactly that connection is. I mean, I have some thoughts, but
Yeah.
I'd like to hear yours.
Yeah, so I think one part of it is particularly as it pertains to women, like any time in history, you've seen like a rise in women's rights or women's liberation, this introduction of like you can just almost look at historically, like look at the timelines, right? There's always been this push to thinness again. And it's because again, when we are super hyper focused on maintaining a thinner body and looking at it being in a thinner body, we oftentimes on the surface level, we think, oh, we just want to be pretty, we just want to be beautiful. But it's literally never about that. It's about control. And when we are hyper focused on those things as overall women, we are easily to more easy to control because we aren't thinking about these other things that are happening. And I can even talk about that from my personal experience when I was like deep in diet culture and trying to be the smallest version of myself. Literally all of my energy and attention was going to the pursuit of that. And I didn't really have any energy to think about anything else that was happening in the world, my own life, the world, and larger at large. And so I think that's a really big piece. It's about control. It's a distraction, and it's always been that. So that's a really big part of it. And then I think what we talked about earlier, this idea that thinness is linked to morality.
Mhm.
Right. And so that if we're thinner people, we are more moral and we're more disciplined and all of these things. And so when we think about just like the what's happening politically right now with like women's rights, with like marital rights, with abortion rights, like all of these things, it seems as if we, not even seems as, there's desire to go back to this state that we were in before. And meanwhile, we're pushing women towards being skinny again and being hyper fixated on anti-aging and hyperfixated on beauty and skincare, all of these things. It's like, yeah, like don't pay attention to the rights losing that you're losing over here. I want you to pay attention to these things.
Mhm.
And I just think there's a lot to be said about that. And there's a really good book that I hate to mention because the person, I don't know, I wouldn't know if they're reputable anymore, but the book is still really good. It's like that thing, can you separate the art from the artist? I'm not sure. But the book, The Beauty Myth, talks about this a lot.
Um,
And I just think there's a lot to be said there, and there's a much deeper conversation to be had. And just the way that when I was talking about like TV and media, it's like the way that we're seeing these little sprinkles, not even sprinkles, I think like big I talked about the last season of Love is Blind Minneapolis, and there was this like, there's a lot of conversation around church, around religion, and around like we don't get divorced in this family, and like all of these things
mhm.
that are, I think, really reminiscent of like what the cultural values are trying to push in this country. And I just think everything is always tied back to politics, and I think we often like to say that our reality TV is just for fun, but like nothing is, I hate to be that person, but like nothing is just for fun. Like there's
That's
always an
true.
underlying message. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, it is really interesting. I mean, and I think that I think a lot more does need to be said about the connection
Yeah.
between not just, even not just thinness, but like things like age,
Hmm.
thinness, even things like your makeup, even like
Clean girl aesthetic, right?
yeah, it's like the same.
Yes.
There's like this like whole like aesthetic that people are saying like
Hmm.
this is the price, this is the thing, and we
Yeah.
all have to conform to this one particular thing, and that is conservatism. And so it's
Yes.
not because like
Yes.
what
Yeah.
liberalism is more about acceptance of a variety of different things, and conservatism is more like of the opposite, which is like, striving to be this one particular thing, which in this country is, patriarch is tied to patriarchy, is tied to
Yeah.
race, tied to class, tied to like a lot of different things. And it's not like a simple like, oh, well, it's just like fashionable to be skinny nowadays again.
Yeah.
It's a lot deeper than that.
Even the fashion industry and clothing, like the clothing choices and what's popular right now.
Hmm. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Or like the whole like American Eagle thing where they had like this
Yes.
body inclusivity for many years. And like so many
Hmm.
people like bought their jeans because they were inclusive. And then they had
Yes.
to switch over to the Sydney Sweeney, like almost like eugenics, like ad,
Absolutely.
which was like a big shift. And she's also like a MAGA family too.
Right.
So this is like, okay, this is where things are going.
Yeah. And even like that, right? Like some people make, oh, that's not a big, like that's not subtle. It's actually not subtle. It's actually very, like the Sydney Sweeney ad is like very intentional, actually. And it's actually, I would argue, not subtle at all, right?
Hmm.
But for folks who maybe aren't paying attention to those things, they're just like, oh, it's a cute ad. And it's like, no, it's really intentional and the messaging is really clear.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So with all of that in mind, this is like such a, I could talk about this forever, obviously.
Yeah.
What would you advise for our listeners? Like how to like find your peace in a way in
Yeah.
all of this that's happening?
Yeah, it's hard. I will say that. I think it's growing harder by the day because there's just every day you wake up and you're like the whiplash of what's happening. Like this celebrity's getting married, this thing is happening, this genocide is occurring. It's like all over the place, right? So it's like, how do
Mhm.
you maintain any sense of like normalcy, especially peace with your body is really difficult. I'm going back to the same thing I said earlier, is like I think really just acknowledging that it's really hard, especially in the current climate, is really, really difficult. And so no matter what you wake up feeling, find compassion for yourself. I go back to books that I've read before that have really helped me. I always go back to those things. I go back to people like, I think ideally in a perfect world we would all just get off of social media, right? Because doing it, but that's not going to happen in my world and probably not for most of us, right? So it's like, how can I work towards at least trying to follow people that bring me joy in my timeline or that I think resonate with like the way I'm trying to show up in the world. So finding people to follow that really help in that regard. And also like I think like I do think Substack is social media, but like it's different to me. So I think connecting with writers that you really, if reading is your thing, I'm a reader, so whatever. But connecting with writers that are talking about things that feel pertinent to you and also like connecting with people in real life. Like, my circle, my friend circle are people that hold similar values. And I think it's really important to have like in-person support because it can be really challenging. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, also to read your book, The Body
Yes. And read my
Liberation
book.
Project.
Yes.
Yeah. And by the way,
Yes.
like there's a lot of I was just telling Kristen the other day about like nonfiction books. It's a lot of like hit or miss, and like a lot of people who have something to say are not necessarily the best storytellers. But you really paint the picture in a very
Oh, thank
personal
you.
way, telling the story of like how you first came to be aware of your body in childhood. And so, and there's just like really telling the story of being like you personally. And I really like, even though you're a different person, you had a whole different experience. I mean, maybe not so much. My mom had me doing sit-ups when I was 5. So
I mean,
like,
that I heard you say that, I was like, whoa,
yeah,
that's
I
intense.
know.
That's
And
very
so
intense.
yeah. So, but she was always told to do stuff like that too. And so like she was just like doing what she knew, right? And so like we all have these experiences, and I think that you do a really good job of like relating that to like real life. And so
Thank
I
you.
really highly recommend your book. So,
Thank you. Thank you. And I thank you for saying that. And also that's what I do hope when people read the book, because again, we all have different backgrounds, but I hope that some part of the story makes someone feel seen and understood or represented. Like that's all I can really hope for. So thank you.
well, thank you for joining us
Yeah.
today.
Yeah, thank you
Thank you
so
so much for
much.
having me. I feel like I could have talked to y'all all day. This is so great.
I know it went by way too fast.
Yeah, it did go by really fast.